Hey guys, what's up? My name is Gabe and this is Games with Gabe. This is the next tutorial in the Coding Geometry Dash in Java series. If you remember from the last tutorial, we got parallax backgrounds working. So now we have the ability to just make the player look like he's moving a much greater distance than he actually is, and make it look like there's foreground, midground, and background elements to the scene. In this tutorial, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up our level editor to start adding new objects to the scene. So if you remember, I said we were going to do triangle bounds, but we can't do that yet because we have no way to add spikes and triangles into our scene. So what we're going to do is I'm splitting this up into two parts, and we're going to have the first part be the basis for setting up all the drawing elements for our menu and starting the collections and stuff that we'll need. And the second tutorial will be setting up the functionality for the level editor so that all the functionality of clicking everything, clicking the different buttons works and everything like that. So before we do that, let's start doing some theory and see how the theory of all this works. And then once we know that, we will try and code it. Okay, let's try this. All right, guys. So as you saw in the beginning clip, what we're going to essentially have is this tabbed menu system where we have just the menu container, which is where all the buttons are. And then we have a couple of dividing lines, and we have several tabs up top. And these tabs each have a collection of different objects down inside the menu, which all go throughout here. And so basically what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to ensure that we can have each of these tabs attached to some specific objects. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a dictionary that basically looks like this. We'll have a tab, and let's say this is the spikes tab, and this will point to a list of game objects, which are just a bunch of buttons, and we'll have these in one big list. And then we'll have another tab, and this tab is like, say, the squares. And this one will point to another list of buttons, which is our squares, and so on and so forth. And then these will be contained in just a big dictionary where these are our keys and these are the values. So then we can commence and continue to do exactly the same things we did for the level editor for all the buttons, just the same exact way, except we just grab whichever list is our current tab. So then we'll have one variable called current tab, which basically tells us which key we are currently on, and then we can switch between that key to get the list of objects. So we're going to set up like all the drawing and everything for this, because actually implementing the clicking and everything, switching between tabs, switching between buttons, which is something we still haven't really done yet, is a little bit complicated. So let's implement the drawing and everything and get that working right, and then we'll move on to the second part, which is when we'll actually add the clickability and the functionality to this level editor. Okay guys, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to copy our assets over. I'll have a link in the description. So I'm going to copy the UI, and then I'm actually just going to copy the rest of this stuff too. So all of these different images, and then I'm going to actually remove the button sprites because it's inside of UI, and we'll change up the references to that too in just a minute. So we have that done. Then the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to change the references to that UI image so that it shows the correct image. So in order to do that, we will go to the level editor scene where we have our first reference to it. So inside of here, and then you'll notice it says button sprites. So just change this to UI/button sprites. And then we'll go into our main container, which has the other reference, and it says button sprites. We'll change that to UI/button sprites. Let's run this, make sure it still works. Alright, it works just fine, so that's good. Next thing we're going to do, since we're in the main container, is like I said, we're going to need a couple more variables up here, some different ones. So first one I'm going to create is a list of game objects, and this is going to be our tabs. So like I said, we have this list of game objects with the tabs, which points to a dictionary or a map, which has a game object as the key, and a list of game objects as the value, which is the tab, pointing to a container of objects. I'm going to call this our tab maps. And then inside of our constructor, let's just initialize these. So we'll say this.tabs equals a new array list, and then this.tab maps equals a new HashMap. And that should be good for those variables. Now, before we start actually doing everything we need to do inside here, we need some more constants, which will be very helpful as we continue to create all this stuff. So first constant we're going to need, let's make this constant called the container offset y, and this is going to be like the main container, sort of like the background element that you saw in the first part, which honestly should have been there a long time ago. Just never got around to adding it. Then we will create this constant called tab width. So static final int tab width. This is going to equal 75, sorry. And then we are going to create tab height, and tab height is going to be 38. And yeah, these are really weird numbers too. Don't ask me how I came up with them. They just worked. So then we're going to have this couple more constants. So this one's going to be tab offset x, which is going to be 380. And then we're going to have a tab offset in the y direction as well. And this one is going to be 497. And then we're going to have one final one, which is the tab horizontal spacing, and this one is going to be equal to 10. And then that should be it for all of our constants. So let's go back to the level editor scene, and then at the top of the class we're going to add one more member variable. This is going to be a sprite, and we will call this container bg. So this is just the background for the container, and then inside of here we'll say this dot container, we'll move it down one more, this dot container bg equals asset pool dot get sprite, and this is assets slash UI slash container background dot png. And then let's draw that as well. So we'll scroll down to our draw method, and drawing it is just as simple as you would think. We will literally just say g2.drawImage, and we'll say this dot container bg.image, and then 0, and y is going to be constants dot container offset y. Width is going to be this dot container bg dot width, and this dot container bg dot height, and then null image observer. So if we run this again, we should get a container image now. And instead what we're going to get is we can't read the input file. So did we spell this correct? We did not spell this correct. It's menu container background. So now if we run this one more time, you can see we have that little background now, and what you'll notice is it's not going completely below that first row, so this leads me to the next thing we're going to do. So let's go to the level editor scene, and then we're going to add 70 inside of this method where we're checking for the camera position, just to make sure that we can see the bottom of this. We don't want to change it for the actual gameplay, because for the gameplay it seems good, but now we can move down past the bottom of the ground and it seems pretty good. So this next one is actually a kind of a big one. So we're staying inside the level editor scene, and we have to add in, we added a bunch of images at the beginning of this video, copying all them. Now we're going to actually have to add in all those sprite sheets. So right below the button sprites, we'll say asset pool.add sprite sheet. This is going to be assets slash UI slash tabs.png, and the width is going to be constants.tab width. The height is going to be constants dot tab height, and then we have 2 for our spacing, 6 columns, and 6 for our size. Then we'll do asset pool dot add sprite sheet. This one's going to be assets slash spikes dot png, and make sure you're spelling everything correctly, unlike me. And so then these spikes are going to have 42 by 42, and they're going to have 2 spacing, 6 for the columns, and 4 for the size. Then we will go asset pool to add sprite sheet, assets slash, and this one's going to be big sprites.png. As you can see, this is a lot of just like dull work. It's a lot of just adding things, which is what most of this video could be, unfortunately. But it's something we need to get done in order to have the rest of our game working right. So then this one will be small blocks.png. And for small blocks, we will have 42 by 42, spacing 2, column 6, size is 1. And then lastly, we have the portal sprite. So we'll say assets slash portal.png, and this would be 44 by 85, 2, 2, 2. And that should be good. We should be able to move on now. Now let's go back to our main container class. So inside of here, we'll go to main container. And inside of our init function, what we're going to do is we are actually going to get one more sprite sheet. So we'll say sprite sheet tab sprites equals asset pool get sprite sheet, and this could be our assets/ui/tabs.png, I think. Yep, assets/tabs.png. And then we're going to go and create another for loop. This will be adding in all of those tabs. So just like the actual tab images themselves. So we'll say for I equals 0 until I is less than tab, sprites.sprites.size I plus plus. And then inside this loop, we're basically going to get the current tab. So sprite current tab. So the current tab image is tab sprites.get I, whichever one we're actually on right now. Then the x is going to be constants.tab offset x. And actually, yeah, that should be fine. So tab offset x plus, and then we're going to say the current tab.column times constants.tab width. So we get the width between them. And then we also want to add in the current tab.column times the constants.spacing. So we want to make sure we get those spaces in there as well. So tab spacing, horizontal spacing. Then we'll say int y equals constant, if I can spell, dot tab offset in the y direction. So that should be our x and y for each of the tabs. Then we're going to create a new object, and this is going to be the tab object. So we'll say this is a new game object. We'll call this generated. Let's call it a tab, because that's what it is. We'll give it a new transform, which has a new vector 2 with the x and the y we just created. And then I'll give it a z-index of 10, because that should be good. Let's set UI to true, although we should never have to worry about this, because we will be drawing this manually. And then we'll say add component, current tab, so that it has that component, and then that's the sprite image too. Current tab is the sprite. So then we will go and we'll say this dot tabs dot tab maps tabs dot add obj, and then we will say this dot tab maps dot put, and we'll put this obj and a new empty array list, because right now this tab has nothing attached to it. That's what we're going to be doing in the next part of this. Then we'll say window dot get current scene dot add game object, and we will add this obj. Okay, so yeah, we actually do have to worry about this set UI to true and to make sure that we draw this correctly. Then what we'll say is let's go up here and create one more variable that we will need. We'll make this public, and this is going to be a game object and current tab. This will control which tab we are currently on, and we'll end up using that once we add the functionality and everything to be able to tell which objects we should be showing. So we'll say this dot current tab equals this dot tabs dot get 0. And then next what we're going to do is we're going to abstract this part out, because it's starting to get very big in this init function. We will call this add tab objects, and we're going to pass in the button sprites, because that is something we will need. So then I'm going to go and copy all of that, and I'm going to create the function. So we'll say private void add tab objects, and this will take in a sprite sheet, button sprites, paste all that stuff back in, and then we're also going to go ahead and going to copy this and paste this into here. You know what, we don't even need to pass this in, really. I mean, we can just grab it right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this also, take that out, and then paste it in right down here. Okay, so then we can start working on this for loop, which is going to be basically a giant repeat of this for every single tab object. So we're basically, what we're doing now is we're adding in every single sprite sheet and making sure that the image dimensions are right, and we have the box bounds attached to each of these game objects and everything, so that when we go and copy all of them, they will be working correctly. But before we do that, real quick, we will go into menu item, I believe. Yes, menu item. And let's actually implement this copy method, because when I was writing this code, I was writing this over and over and over again. I was like, you know, just implement the copy method. It's useful. Let's change this to, instead, component menu item. And then we will say return a new menu item. And this takes in this.x, this.y, this.width, this.height. And then we need this.buttonsprite.copy and this.hoversprite.copy. And we will cast these to sprites, because that's what this is complaining about. So I'll cast that to a sprite and cast that to a sprite. So with that done, back to main container. And then let's get all the sprite sheets that we added in that last part and add them in here. Okay, so we have the sprite sheet, the ground sprites. Then we will have our spike sprites. And these are called assetpool.getSpriteSheet. And this is assets/spikes.png. All these words are so similar too. It's like tongue twisters, I feel like, trying to say all this stuff. Big sprites equals assetpool.getSpriteSheet. This is going to be assets/bigsprites.png. Then we have our small blocks. And these are going to be our assetpool.getSpriteSheet. assets/smallblocks.png. And lastly, we have our portal sprites. And this could be our assetpool.getSpritesheet. And this could be assets/portal.png. It's a good thing that we added all those sprite sheets in an asset pool, because that would just really start cluttering this up. I mean, this is going to be a pretty cluttered function anyways, but it does one job, and that is adding the tab objects. So we're not violating that principle of one functionality for our function, for each of our functions. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little bit more context to what we're doing at each step. This is adding in our first tab containers OBJ. So this is basically adding in the first tab. I'm going to call this a first tab because these are all first tab objects. I'm just going to leave it to gen for generated. And z-index -1. Yeah, I guess that's fine. I mean, it was working fine before. I'm just going to change it to 10 because that's what I'm going to be putting the rest of them on. And then let's also add in right over here. We'll say obj.setUI true, and then obj.set non-serializable because we don't want to serialize this. And then instead of adding this to menu items, what we're going to do is we're going to say this.tabmaps.get, this.tabs.get 0. So we're getting the 0th element, the 0th tab, the first tab, which is why we have this comment at first tab. And then we're going to say add and this obj. Next, we're going to do this for every single tab that we have. So I'm going to add another comment, add second tab container objs. Also, I finally cleared out that Windows Defender virus thing down here. So that's good. So if we do if I is less than small blocks.sprites.size, we want to make sure that we can actually access each of them because they all have different sort of sizes, different amounts of elements in each one. So we're just making sure that we're not going to get an index out of bounds error. We're just going to reuse our variables. We'll say obj equals a new game object, and this is going to be gen for generated, and a new transform with a new vector 2 xy, because it's actually going to be at the same xy for every single one of these. They're just going to be on different layers, sort of. And then we'll say obj.setUI true. And the way we achieve those layers is just by choosing to show certain ones depending on which tab we're on. So we're basically going to use the same exact thing. So we'll say menu item is menu item.copy. And we're going to say obj.add component. This is where it starts changing. Smallblocks.sprites.get I. So we get the correct image, which is from small blocks instead of like up here where we're getting from, where is it? Yeah, current sprite, which is getting it from ground sprite. So we're changing it up a little bit down here because we're using a different sprite sheet for the second tab. And then what we'll say is obj.add component, the menu item that we just created as well. And then we'll say if I is 0, which I believe there's only just one element in this anyways. We'll say obj.add component, new box bounds, constants.tile width, and then the height is 16. So this is also important because for each of these sprites, some of them do have like different widths and heights. So we have to ensure that we get all those correctly added inside of this function. This is basically the function that defines the bounds for every single one of our objects. And then we'll say this.tabmaps.get, and then we'll say tabs.get1.add this obj. This is basically the equivalent, I guess you could say, of if we had like an actual level, like an actual sprite sheet editor and stuff like in Unity, and we were manually defining the widths and the height of everything. Okay, so now we move on to the fourth tab container because I was too lazy and never added sprites for third tab container. I was planning on doing it, which is why I had it there, but I just never got around to it. So we'll say if it's less than this guy's sprite size, then we can say obj equals a new game object, and we'll call this gen. And this takes a new transform with a new vector 2, x and y. and 10 for z index. Then we'll say set non-serializable and set UI true. Then we'll say menu item equals menu item dot copy obj dot add component spike sprites dot get I, and then obj dot add component menu item. So almost exactly the same thing. I'm gonna add a to do here. IntelliJ is really nice too. It'll list your to-dos down here so that whenever you're trying to figure out what you need to do, you can just look at your to-dos. So add triangle component here. So this is like the triangle bounds. I'm going to specify a little bit more. Triangle bounds component. This is where we will add the triangle bounds components whenever we get around to finally creating those triangle bounds components. I'll say this.tabmaps.get, this.tabs.get 3.add obj, which would be the final step for that. Then we will add our fifth tab container objs. For this one, we'll say if I equals 0. I believe there's only one inside of this one too. We'll say obj equals new game object gen new transform new vector to x, y, and 10 for the z index. We'll say obj.set UI true, obj.set non-serializable, just like we've been doing. Menu item equals menu item dot copy, and then obj.add component menu item and obj.add component big sprites dot get I. As I'm writing all this code too, we probably could make a function that does all this and just returns the object, which I would definitely recommend that you do if you want to have more maintainable code. Create a function for all this that does all this and takes in a sprite as a parameter, because that's the only thing that's been changing throughout all these. Then returns an object at this state, and then we can do all the things that change, which ends up happening like right here. So say add component new box bounds, and we'll give this constants dot tile width times 2, and the height will be 56 because this is a little bit of a bigger sprite, and that should be good. And then we'll say this dot tab maps dot tabs dot get tabs dot get, and this is the fifth, so 4 dot add, and then we'll say obj. Then we will say add sixth tab container objs, and same thing, we're going to say if I is less than portal sprites dot size, then obj equals a new game object, and this can be generated, and new transform new vector to x, y, and 10 for our z index, and then we'll say obj.set UI true, obj.set non-serializable menu item equals menu item dot copy, and then we'll say add those components, so menu item, and then obj.add component, dot add component, if I can spell this right, and this will be our portal sprites, so we'll say portal sprites dot get I, and then we need to do a new box bounds, so we'll give it a new box bounds with a width of 44 and a height of 85. And we're going to add some more parameters in the future too to the box bounds, because clearly you shouldn't be able to collide with a portal, but we do need to know when the player enters the portal space, which is why we're giving it a box bounds. So future tutorial down for that one. And then we're going to say to do add a portal component here. So whenever we create portal components that transition the player from like a just regular state to a flying state or back to a regular state, and that's what we'll be doing right there. Then we'll say this dot tabmaps.get tabs.get, and this is the fifth because it's 6, and then we'll say dot add obj. That should be it. So we're going to have to do a couple last things, which is basically just draw based on whichever tab we're currently on. And in order to do that, we will need to alter our start, update, and draw loop. So for our start loop, instead of doing this, we're actually going to have to say for game object G in our tabs, and then for game object G2 in our tab maps.get, whatever tab we're currently on, which is G. And then we'll say for component C in G2.getAllComponents, we'll say, or whoops, for C and G2, .get components will say C.start, so we'll alter that. And then we will alter the update loop. Instead of looping through this .menu items, we'll say this .tab maps .get current tab. So we're only updating whatever current tab we're on, those objects. And then inside of our draw loop, we will say, instead of looping through the menu items once again, we're going to just loop through tab maps .get current tab. And that should be it. So if we run it, it should look exactly the same, except we have these tabs up here now. And if we go up to the top of our program and change the current tab, so let's switch it to the first tab, then we should get the first tab's objects, which is just this thing. And if you click on it, you can actually add it into your game world, just like you should be able to. If we switch it to the second tab, or third tab technically, which is this one, I have nothing there. Fourth tab, we'll get some sprites for the triangles. That's a little bit messed up. So we'll fix that in just a second. This is why we test too, to make sure we get everything right. Fifth tab should be the portals. So I think I missed a tab. And then sixth tab is probably going to show nothing. Okay, yeah. Did I miss something? Or maybe I just skipped one. So if we do 3. Okay, I just missed one. So 3, which is the fourth. And then we have all these. So the other ones were working properly. As you could see though, with the bigger sprites, we have a little bit of a problem, which we will fix in the next tutorial whenever we begin to actually add the functionality to these menus and clean up those bugs and stuff. So when we add the functionality, what we're going to do is notice how when I switch, it switches it, but I can't click back. That's because we never reset the states everything. So we're going to add in methods to do that. And we're also going to add in methods where if we click onto these, we can actually switch between the tabs and we don't get this artifact where it places them wherever we click. Which I think we cleaned up with that, yeah, but we didn't clean up with this. So that's all stuff that we will be doing in the next tutorial. If you guys like this, please hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks, guys. See ya.